Please welcome back to the stage, Shannon Colbert.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back. So for our session on ocean-based climate solutions, I'd like to say ocean-based solutions provide a key role when it comes to climate adaptation, protecting biodiversity, and sustaining productive coastal economies, in building the resilient communities and ecosystems that we rely on. Historic investments in our nation's natural infrastructure provide transformative opportunities to maximize win-win solutions to build climate resilience, to learn from and bolster tribal and indigenous-led conservation and restoration efforts, and to leverage public-private partnerships and develop diverse and inclusive workforces. It's my honor to invite Sean Cosgrove from the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation to provide some opening remarks for this amazing group of people who will be imparting their wisdom and knowledge in the work that they do with us on a day-to-day basis. The Moore Foundation is one of our signature sponsors for CHOW 2022 and has continued to remain that strong partner for CHOW 2023, as well as so many other efforts in marine conservation, including a lot of the folks that are in this room, as well as many of the folks who will be talking here today. And I will say, for the late Gordon Moore, I think that the work that we do here and the work that we're going to be talking about during this session are the exact work and legacy that he would have wanted to see move forward. These are really transformative pieces that are happening within our communities. And I'm really glad to be able to have them as that strong partner moving forward on so many fronts for marine conservation and biodiversity. So with that, Sean.
Good morning. Happy World Ocean Day. Isn't this great? All right, it's always a treat for me to be able to come here and represent the Moore Foundation. Especially support this panel. This is going to be a great panel. I'm glad to see you all here. The health of our oceans are in part what inspired Gordon and Betty Moore's commitment to conservation. And they wrote about this in 2015. They said, "Our interest stems from our personal observations of changes in the natural world and from the dependency of all living species on the planet's health. Jungles have become golf courses, beaches, condominium developments, and the oceans have been overfished and become garbage dumps. With these changes, precious ecosystem functions are lost, often forever. Huge areas of the planet are in danger of having their basic structure altered as a consequence of development and exploitation of resources." So Dr. Moore believed fundamentally in the power of scientific discovery and in identifying pragmatic solutions to our biggest planetary challenges. We know that the scientific discoveries and the solutions to the decline in ocean ecosystem health can only happen because of the work of our grantees, their allies, and this is important, a strong community networked, working together towards dedicated conservation action. Our great honor is to support the work that many of you do here on behalf of our very blue planet's ocean, and to create positive outcomes for future generations. So please, on the behalf of some of my grantees here, let me recommend two great tools that everybody can use now. A very recently released progress report on current U.S. ocean climate policy developed by dozens of organizations. You can go online, oceanclimateaction.org/report, and look for Turning U.S. Ocean Climate Policy into Action. It's the name of the report, Turning U.S. Ocean Climate Policy into Action. And then also, in your spare time, check out my favorite ocean podcast, Rising Tide, the Ocean Podcast. You can find that anywhere you find your other podcast, Rising Tide, the Ocean Podcast. Thank you very much for being here. Look forward to a great panel. Enjoy the day and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sean. And thank you again to the Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation for your support on so many fronts. It's my pleasure to introduce Solomon Pili Kaho Ohalahala. Uncle Saul was born on the island of Lanai and descended from a long line of Hawaiian navigators, keepers of the land, waters, and sea. Inspired by the mission of traditional seafaring and wayfinding, he became a crew member on the Hawaiian double-hulled voyaging canoe Hokulea. He's advocated for the protection of sacred places for Native Hawaiians and Pacific Islanders, including Papahanaumokuakea Marine National Monument and the Pacific Remote Islands Marine National Monument. He's someone who's led visionary efforts to look at big protections for our ocean. I'm very honored to be able to introduce him so that he can talk about some of his work with us and share his wisdom with us. Uncle Saul.
So I want to begin by saying, aloha kako apau. Mahalo. This is my first opportunity to do something like this, and they said, you're going to do it in a TED Talk format. And I said, oh, what is that? You're going to be on a stage and you can do whatever you want. But anyway. So anyway, what I'm going to try and do is I'm going to try and negotiate with this system so that I can have a conversation with you and then hopefully be able to present you some very insightful, deep thought about how we look at the issues of climate-based solutions, but from an indigenous perspective. So let me begin by introducing to you a concept, and it's a olelo no eau for us, and it says, ikawa mamua, ikawa mahope. So in our Hawaiian way of thinking, ikawa mamua means if you want to go forward, if you want to advance, then you must look backward. So wa mamua, wa mahope. And so that is how we kind of process where we are at and what are we doing, what's happening. But it always has to involve us having to make sure that we're linking back to some knowledge, some experience, some past, so that we can take all of that to decide how best to deal with what's before us, and then be the innovators and be able to think about what directions, what course we should take. So, ikawa mamua, ikawa mahope. So, with that, I'd like to begin, because it's a cultural presentation, right? So, I would like to open this session by calling in our ancestors to be here amongst us. And it is part of our traditional protocol. And so, I'd like to invite you all to join in with me. I'm going to do an oli, and in that oli, I'm going to be calling our ancestors, our kupuna, to come here before us and sit amongst us and bring all of what they represent in our families, in our genealogies, in their knowledge, in their wisdom, in their experiences, so that we can feel that we are comforted. And then the work that we do and are about to do will not be one that we're standing alone. We're going to be inviting our kupuna into the audience. So think about who your kupuna are, who your grandparent, who the person that you think has helped you, and invite their spirit into this space as I call upon my kupuna to come into this space. So this is an oli that's called ehomai. It's used quite often in Hawaii, and so I'd like to use this as the oli to call upon our ancestors. So please join with me. Okay. E ho mai, ka ike mai luna mai e. O nā mea huna no e au o nā mele e. E ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai e ho mai ka ike mai luna mai e. O nā mea huna no e o nā mele e ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai e ho mai ka ike mai luna mai e. O nā mea huna no e au o nā mele e ho mai, e ho mai, e ho mai e. Right. Mahalo, thank you. So, I want to begin by introducing one of the things that I think are culturally appropriate for us. We're talking about advancements, we're talking about solutions, we're talking about problems in these changing times. And the Olelo No'eau says, in order to do that, we need to look backward. So what I'd like to do is to introduce to you an opportunity to look backward along with me, okay? So I'd like to introduce to you the Kumulipo. Okay? So I want to honor our last reigning queen for the moment that she took to translate this chant, story, or song into English. And therefore she leaves for us this genealogy so that we can actually look back. And then with that, I want to honor that she took the time to do this, and it's been 130 years since this was translated by our last reigning queen. So let me talk about the elements of the Kumulipo so that you'll have an opportunity to appreciate our worldview. Okay. So the Kumulipo is our Hawaiian cultural roots. It is our family's genealogy, and it is our connection to all things that are created. So ecosystems from the deepest seas to the land, to the mountain, to the sky, is all interconnected. And so we see ourselves as one. There's no separation between terrestrial and marine. So the Kumulipo. So it was composed by Keaulumoku in the 1700s and was translated by our queen, as I said, during her imprisonment in 1895 at Iolani Palace. So if you don't know Hawaii's history, just a side note here, the Hawaiian Islands were illegally overthrown by the United States in an act of war. And at that moment, our queen was imprisoned in her own bedroom, in her own palace. And even at that moment, that most critical moment for a nation to be taken away from her, she decided that one of the things that she will do is to take the Kumulipo and she's going to translate it into English. Think about that. I think about that, and I cannot imagine what was going through her mind. But she does tell us some of the things that were going through her mind. So she says that the translating of the Kumulipo pleasantly employed me while in prison. Oh, that's pretty optimistic for someone that's been stripped of her own kingdom. But I'm happy that she did. Okay? And then she says, my friends, they will have a souvenir of my work as part of my life during that time. And then she also says something very important here. She says, it may be of value to genealogists and scientific societies. This is the part that to me is relevant, because when you start reading the story of our chant of creation, you will begin to understand the complexities of the connection that we have to the environment and ecosystems. And I think this is the part that she is envisioning that will be relevant at some future date. And here we are, 130 years later, since this event of the overthrow, and this chant, this story, is as relevant today for what it is we are seeking to find solutions for. And then, of course, it is also the genealogy. So it is the chant that gives the genealogy of creation. So we begin at the beginning of the darkest place in the genealogy of dark and light, and then the matter that's created around the energy of dark and light will create the first creatures to be born. And that is the beginning of the Kumulipo and our genealogy. So pretty optimistic for someone that's just been stripped of her nation. It is, by the way, it is chanted by memory. 2,102 lines. I'll not do that for you today. Okay. But I will tell you that there are children in Hawaii today that are reciting this chant to give it the life back that it needs. And it's totally awesome. And it's all done in memory. So I'm encouraged by that the chant and the genealogy is still living. It was also recited during the Makahiki, which is a season in Hawaii from the months of October to February, of which the islands were plentiful, the islands were fat, they were full, they were productive, and there was a time of rest and peace. And it is at that time in Hawaii's history that our god Lono, who's the god of agriculture and also of procreation, is given honor, because this is the time that talks about creation. Okay? It was first chanted here by Pu'o to Captain Cook when he arrives in the Hawaiian Islands in the season of the Makahiki. And because they thought Cook to be the god Lono, they chanted it for him. They found out later he wasn't the god. So I want to give you some of the elements that are part of this Kumulipo. And again, this is the version that has been translated by the Queen herself, you know, and I'm very honored that I have that in my. You know. So I wanted to share with you the foreword that was written to share the Kumulipo with all of you, and I want to honor Dr. Pualani Kanakaole Kanahele and her beautiful words in talking about the elements of the Kumulipo. So she says that the Kumulipo is a mele ko'ihonua. It is the remembrance from the lipo of our deepest past and the lipo of our unknown future. Okay? It heralds the existence from dawn to dawn, or the numerous beginnings and endings. The Kumulipo acknowledge the vali, what I talked about, where the matter is the place of which creatures first emerged. Okay? And it created all living forms, and it ascends from there. The fundamental images, the thoughts, forms, and shapes from the vali evolved and increased into familial patterns. It is the organic inception of all of our family systems. So here is the beginning of our genealogy, and it begins at this point, the vali. But it is now going to be evolving and organized into what we know is the natural world, and all things come in an order. So this, our kupuna believed, our elders believed. Okay? Now, the Kumulipo also articulates and it reveals the connections of the sky, the earth, the ocean, and the land, and man, and gods, and then returns again and repeats the cycle with the sky and the interrelationship of all things in an everlasting continuum, and it is referred to as Ponahakeola. Yeah. Can you say that? Maikai, very good. And so it is the chaotic whirlwind of creation. So if you might simplify this, Ponahakeola is the circle of life. So we begin from somewhere, and then we end at some place, and it continues, the Ponahakeola. Yeah. Yeah. And this is what our kupuna knew. By the way, there will be a test after this. So the Kumulipo echoed the complexities and details of the Hawaiian thought process. His skillful observation and examination brought understanding and respect to everything in his world. He realized that the powers for growth and the bounty were the basic universal elements. The moon cycle was the principal motivator of the earth. It generated extreme movements of the ocean and caused the eyes of the land and the sea to bloom, and dictated the time for the earth to commence or rest from production. Think about that. Awesome, yeah? Mm-hmm. The wind, the ocean currents, and the rivers provided mobility for things and objects incapable of movement. Did you guys know that? And the Hawaiian and all other natural forms in his world were the beneficiaries of this primal cadence and flowed with the rhythm of the universe. This is what our kupuna experienced. So for me, that gives a deep appreciation for us to look at our natural world and our environment and understand its connection and know that there are things that are happening beyond our own comprehension or experience. But our elders knew about this, and it's being shared with us in this chant. The Kumulipo maintained the theme of survival, urgency for life, and preservation of the species, with procreation and evolution as a sinew. The dualistic nature of this poem supports this theme. The dichotomy of land and ocean pairing, strengthened the notion of procreation and survival of the species. The drama of manipulation between Wakea, which is our sky father, and Papa, which is Mother Earth, is the ultimate example of procreation and regeneration. The assimilations of the Taro child and manifold generations, forms of Haumea and Hina, and her multiple nature forms continue the episode of preservation, evolution, and survival. So this our kupuna learned. This idea of duality, if I can give you a simple line in the chant, that the duality, the pairing. So in a section of the chant, it says that the palawa, which is the whale of the deep seas, is related to the awa, and the awa is the sandalwood tree of the land. This duality helps us to know that there needs to be a balance here. If the awa, the sandalwood, is in trouble, then you must take a look at the sea and look at the palawa. Interestingly enough, in Hawaii's history, we have had whaling industries coming to whale our waters in Hawaii and nearly wiping out all whales for oil and for things like that. And at the same time, what was happening, that it was discovered that the awa, or the sandalwood, was a very scented wood, and there was need for this kind of wood for incense and other things in Asia. And so the sandalwood was also being harvested and depleted. And this both happens at the same time in that period of Hawaii's history. So again, this idea of learning and pairing was important to have. So the kumulipo is the reality of our dim past, the foundation of our present, and the pathway into the future. It is a cognizant reminder from our ancestors of their intelligence, their failure, their conquests, and defeat. This is a song which is a gift which encourages the warrior within us to awake the contests of challenges which constantly confront us by using our intelligence and our ancestral experiences. So it is our genealogy connecting mankind to earth, to sky. You are the kumulipo. I am the kumulipo. And so know the esoteric soul inside of you and celebrate your ponahakeola. Celebrate the circle of life. And so our kupuna, our elders say, he makana kupuna ke ia no kako apau. This is our kupuna, our elders' gift to us all. So I like to use this because I think we're talking about advancements, we're talking about technology, we're talking about science, and all of that cannot be resolved by itself unless we take a look at something that's behind us. And I like to offer that the kumulipo helps me to know that the solutions are also within our ability to go back into our past. So I want to end by sharing some of the thoughts of our last queen, Liliuokalani. And she said, the kumulipo, she says, I hope that this will be a useful tool for modern Hawaiians attempting to understand, preserve, and revitalize the Hawaiian culture. She says, I refute the claim that Hawaiians were ignorant savages and had had no culture prior to the arrival of Captain Cook. And then she says, our culture evoked in the rich and haunting lyrics of the Kumulipo is as viable today as when first published, when first chanted, when first sung. And so we speak not only of affection for past times and people, but of respect and understanding for them. As we try to understand the things we have valued and still value in Hawaii, we create a moral vision of what we would like the future Hawaii to be. E ho'omau ya kākou. Let's keep moving forward together. Yeah. So I think for me, in this particular presentation, you'll be hearing examples of where we are at, and I wanted to be able to connect where we can connect to not where our advancements are, where our challenges are presently, but also to bring along our past. So Onipa'a was the Queen's motto. She said, stand firm, be steadfast. So I'm very honored that I can be here presenting her work and her gift to us that's so relevant in these times. So just to remind us all, as we're talking about solutions, as we're looking at where we are at today, that part of our task is to ikawa mamua, ikawa mahope. So, thank you very much. Okay.
Thank you, Akmal Sal. And I'd like to go ahead and welcome the rest of our panelists to the stage as well, our communities. Go ahead. And I'd like us to make sure we can jump right in, because I think that sets a great context for how we can all come together and share our lived experiences. Very quick introduction for our moderator, Betsy Lopez-Wagner. She founded Lopez-Wagner Strategies, where she leads strategic, bilingual, and equitable communications initiatives and ocean justice work throughout her career. So, Betsy.
Hello. So to some of you all, they may be familiar from the Office of National Marine Sanctuaries. There's a National Marine Sanctuary Business Advisory Council. So, a big kudos to the sanctuaries, because this is the 10th anniversary of that extraordinary work that brings really business perspectives into the space. Today, as we're about to get started, really wanted to go ahead and thank Sean Cosgrove, who got us started, as well as Uncle Saul. Before we introduce all of our panelists, I kind of want to look out in the audience and ask you all if any of you all have ever changed an air filter. And so this is a show of hands. I'm going to need to see how many of you all have changed an air filter, and that could be house, car, vape pen. Okay, there's a reason for this question. I don't know how many of you all woke up today feeling the effects of our climate crisis. I know I did. I definitely needed to pull out my inhaler, and I ask a bit about that air filter, because I think something that we need to recognize is that the ocean is one of our biggest air filters. We need to take every opportunity to connect this back to how we breathe, to why this is so critical. And this week had the great fortune and opportunity to spend time with leaders from teens to just about retirement age, who are stepping into ocean conservation. And someone asked during one of our trainings, how do we breathe? They legitimately wanted to know, when you take space and stage, how do you breathe? And this question is so profound, I think, as we step into this space speaking about resiliency, because it's World Ocean Day, and how we breathe is directly connected. So invite you all to be sure to share that with your family, your friends, and your colleagues and others. It's really important that we bring that back and that we center those important perspectives. So as we think about World Ocean Day, Again, this panel is really speaking to the importance of building resilience, thinking about those ocean-based solutions. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and start to introduce our panel here. So we have Lola. Lola Fatoyimbo is an environmental scientist and technologist with NASA and the National Geographic Explorer. Dr. Lola's work has really been from the ground through space, and so really thinking about her work on global measures of tidal marsh change and drivers of mangrove loss and how that connects to our climate crisis and the threats and the resilience. She will be sharing some of her work, some of that work that will actually be most helpful to inform natural resource management and decisions that are being made worldwide. You all had the great opportunity and good fortune to meet Uncle Saul, who brought us through the journey of our past and looking back in order to look forward. We welcome Violet Sage Walker to the stage. Violet Sage Walker of the Northern Chumash Tribal Council is the nominator for the proposed Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. She comes to us today with 35 years of experience in cultural resource management and over a decade of work on marine sanctuary campaign. Her work is guiding her council in multifaceted work in California and beyond. And we also want to make sure that we note that Violet has spent a considerable amount of time really thinking about meaningful indigenous collaborative management and what that could look like in the proposal that they have to NOAA. Then our final panelist here we have is Marcela Gutierrez Graudens, the founder and executive director of ASUL. So ASUL is a grassroots environmental justice organization working with Latinx throughout the Americas to protect the ocean and coast. First launched in 2011, it has really worked to elevate the Latinx voices in the conservation space. She is also the vice chair of the California Coastal Conservancy's governing board, a member of the IUCN California Expert Assessment Group for the Green List, and a co-author of Neglected: Environmental Justice Impacts of Marine Litter and Plastic Pollution, published by the United Nations Environment Program, that has been a source in negotiations for the Global Plastics Treaty. So as we get into this conversation of resiliency, I don't know about you all in the audience or those up here on the stage, but resilience is becoming one of these key words everyone is using, and we don't quite know the barometer for where and how folks are defining resiliency. So one of the things we're going to go ahead and invite is that each of you all can share your perspective for how we look at resilience. I'll share with you that IPCC, so for those that remind us to not speak an acronym, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change defines climate resilience as the ability of a system and its component parts to anticipate, absorb, accommodate, or recover from the effects of a hazardous event in a timely and efficient manner, and that includes ensuring the preservation, restoration, or improvement of its essential basic structures and functions. Wow. So how are you able to really endure and then come back? So I'd love to hear from each of you all how you're seeing resilience and how you define that. Lola?
Sure. Thanks for reading that definition, because I actually looked that up yesterday as well in anticipation of today. And a lot of the things that I found were really talking about how when you're talking about resilience, it means that we would be coming back, a system or a person is coming back to its original state. And I feel like sometimes that's not possible, especially when you have, enduring disturbances over and over, like what we're going through right now. And so one of the questions that I actually asked myself, or things I was thinking about, was, well, we probably can't come back to our original state, or ecosystems also change. So thinking about how, I think when you're talking about resilience, there has to be some type of measure of adaptation included in that.
Thank you. Uncle Saul?
Yeah, and I agree. When I stated that, part of our present and our future is looking backward, but be clear that backward doesn't mean to go back to that same place. Granted that there are many, many changes that have occurred, but if you are aware of those changes in the present and you seek back the experiences of your past in those practices from indigenous communities that have show resiliency, that show regeneration, then the question is how to adapt, as you've said, into the current situation to continue to move forward. So that's the innovative part of reaching back and looking at resiliency in terms of what are new ways and innovative ways to create resiliency based on a past and a present achievements.
Thank you. Violet, how about you? How are you defining and viewing resiliency?
Well, I think that anybody that works in ocean conservation is resilient. And so I was thinking you were just talking about us, but I'm like, yes, resiliency. I'm like, we have it. So, but on a broader scale, I would say that resiliency is just like what Uncle Saul said, we have to look back first. And my dad always said that we should flush the idea of sustainability and that we should not talk about sustainability anymore. And it was because we don't want to sustain the massive loss and the massive damage that we have now currently. And so when I think about resiliency, I would think about the word that he came up with. I think he invented the word or stole the word from somebody, but it's thrivability. That we can not be sustainable, but we should be able to thrive. And hopefully with that in mind, in one generation, in my generation, we have lost the ability to eat our native foods, drink water from our creeks and streams and water sources. And we are losing the ability to feed ourselves out of our ocean. And so when I think about resiliency, I think about how we can do better. And that was kind of his motto to live by, let's do better than what we're doing now. So.
Marcia.
It's not a cop-out to say that I agree with all of you, but first of all, I hadn't thought about the idea of how resilient ocean advocates are. But it is quite interesting to see that as we are dealing with the health emergency outside. One of the things that, we talk about resiliency and about sort of like bouncing back, but, bouncing back and bouncing to where? What is exciting to me is this idea of bouncing back differently, and certainly taking the inspiration of different narratives and not, within the ocean movement has been a very Western specific narrative. So I'm very excited to see this different path that we're taking and really recognizing the breadth of knowledge and leadership and expertise that we need to be following. In the perfect world, we would be looking at a place where we don't have to be resilient because we're not having to deal with and survive and come back from these damages. But I am a person that sees things very clear, but at the same time, because we are resilient, we have to remain somewhat optimistic to do this work, right? Because I don't think that you continue to do this work without having some sort of hope in front of you. So I agree with all of the folks here, and I think that it's not necessarily looking back, but centering and rooting ourselves in the knowledge and the leadership when folks are willing to share with us to learn and grow in a different way.
Yeah, thank you. And I think something that we've, become very critically aware of is that, keeping hope in ocean, keeping joy in ocean, managing the impacts and also preventing the impacts of this ocean climate crisis from getting worse is no small feat. Again, I just want the folks in the audience to recognize just the labor, the incredible experience we have up here because, so many are forced to be resilient. And we're in a stage where we're celebrating resiliency. Like that feels very damning when we think about the justice and intersectionality and anti-oppressive systems that communities continue to be forced to endure. Like we'd see prevention and the worst consequences, and we celebrate that people are being harmed. And so just want to make sure that we keep that boundary and that thought here, because We're about to hear a bit from Lola about new research, new work that was published. She's an author of The Effectiveness of Global Protected Areas for Climate Change Mitigation. And would love to start to get us into the solution space so that we can really think about the mitigation and the adaptation and what else has to happen as we're thinking about resiliency. Lola?
Sure. So I really appreciated earlier when Uncle Saul was talking about looking at the past in order to better understand the present and the future, because that's a lot of what I do. It's basically most of the work that I do. I work on with satellite imagery, and so usually looking at the past. And so this paper that just recently came out, it came out last week, was really more focused on terrestrial protected areas, but really trying to quantify how much carbon is stored in terrestrial protected areas, so primarily in forests, and comparing it to the equivalent non-protected areas so that we could actually get some type of measured impact of how much additional carbon was stored in them. And so we did find that, from 2000 onwards until today, it's about 1 full year's worth of global carbon emissions, which is actually huge, because if you think about deforestation rates or how much carbon is absorbed by growth from forests and things like that. So if you look at deforestation rates, it's about 10% of all emissions. So if you look at, if we have all global emissions that are stored in just, we don't have a 30% of all protected areas that cover the globe right now, right? We're trying to get to 30 by 30, and we're not there yet. So just with what we already have, those are doing such a great job at, protecting our carbon stocks. And so I think that it's even though we're focused primarily here on the terrestrial zone, it's just an example of how this is one of the solutions, right? We can have protected areas. We know that these are doing a really good job, even though they are, maybe not designed for carbon mitigation specifically. One of the benefits is that they are doing climate change mitigation. And so, yeah, I think it's, especially with the people here, obviously, and the whole theme of the meeting here, just highlighting how effective some conservation and protection can be, and being able to actually measure it is really important.
Thank you. And Violet, for you, your community has put forward a nomination for a national marine sanctuary. Can you tell us where this sits on that spectrum of solutions?
Sure. So we're in hopefully the final stages of the marine sanctuary nomination, and for those. Well, I'm not going to say for those of you who don't know, because I'm sure everybody in here has done their work, their homework, and knows about the 6 marine sanctuary nominations pending, including the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary. So I know that a lot of folks in the audience are our supporters and our partners and allies. So we're looking forward to the last and final comment period about the management plan, specifically highlighting tribal co-management, and also the relationship. This is the first of many, but the relationship between the Chumash Heritage and the biggest California offshore wind farm location. So for those of you that don't know, the Chumash Heritage National Marine Sanctuary will be bordering on the western border, the northwestern side of the sanctuary, the largest and most ambitious offshore floating wind farm that we have. So that posed challenges, and that most people don't realize that I've been having to self-train myself into becoming an expert in offshore wind for the past 10 years, as well as working on the marine sanctuary, and mainly so that it wouldn't sink the marine sanctuary nomination or curtail it in any way. We've had to negotiate to invest equal amounts of money into ocean conservation and renewable energy, and make sure that they're funded simultaneously. And so that has been the focus, is that in our rush to get green renewable energy and this extractive energy source out of the ocean, that we equally fund ocean conservation and marine protected spaces, and that we also equally include diverse groups some of our partners here, Hispanic Access Foundation, and groups around the country that need to have a seat at the table, has been kind of the core value of the Chumash heritage, is being very inclusive of the community and being very collaborative. And we like to think of ocean solidarity with our partners in Hawaii and around the world, Pacific remote islands, the Marianas Trench, all the way down to Chile. Everybody that has similar concerns, and indigenous people around the globe, we consider to be sanctuary sisters with us. So it's been a very long and important learning curve that we have had to stay relevant in the face of the climate crisis, and has changed from our eyes were on offshore oil drilling, as many of you know, in Santa Barbara, now to the effects that offshore wind will have on the oceans and the animals that we take care of. So it's been a challenge, but we're hoping that we do not go through a 10-year review period. And so we're hoping, if I could ask one thing, it was that this will be the last time that we ask for public comments.
Sorry.
For those in the audience, though, we do ask for your questions, so feel free to go ahead and write those down and pass them forward. We'll go ahead and move over to you, Marce. So you helped to design and implement a statewide California network of marine protected areas in your work, and now through your environmental justice organization, you're actively involved in the plastic treaty. Can you tell us on that continuum of solutions? Why plastics? Why now?
Why not? Well, why now? Because we finally, thanks to the work of many, many, many folks on the ground all over the world, have a mandate from the UN that was achieved last February at the Environmental Assembly to negotiate a treaty on plastics. And the very exciting idea is that we are finally in these conversations moving to have a context and a whole, and I refuse to say life cycle, but so a whole cycle approach from, sourcing to waste. And that includes conversations around upstream, around, driving more fossil fuel production, around equitable and just transition for folks like waste picking that work on that around the world. And so I think from both of them, and you mentioned the MPAs, it's really interesting to see this conversation and see where we have come to. And you'll hear me say it a couple of times this week, how much we have changed, and yet how much we have walked, and yet how much more we have to still go. Like I said, I'm someone that is at heart optimistic, which I feel you have to be to do this work. So I like to, what I like to see change much quicker, come about much quicker. Also have to acknowledge that there is some of that change and that we have moved. Maybe because of resiliency, maybe because we need to see and acknowledge and celebrate those incremental wins as much as we would like to have bigger ones in order to continue to do that work, right? So, across the board, I think the exciting part, both with the treaty and issues around marine protected areas, is that we are finally starting to have the conversations that we need to have. We are finally starting to look at some of these solutions in a non-dogmatic way. It is, important and urgent that we look at the equity of where things are placed, how they are placed, who is working on them. Do you have the capacity to undertake yet another 10-year process? How does that get resourced? What does it take to actually participate meaningfully? And when you're not engaged meaningfully, how do you actually step in, step out? So I am heartened, but also a little bit skeptical because I remain to see more of that work. But it's exciting to at least see the start.
Thank you. And for those who heard Lola's phone, that's the ocean calling. It wants some action now. So that was the alert. Uncle Saul, so you were born on the island of Lanai, and you are a descendant of incredible Hawaiian navigators. We have a question from the audience asking particularly about what role should spirituality and spiritual communities have in coastal and ocean conservation and in this climate crisis. I wonder if you can impart some wisdom and some sentiment for the group.
Thank you for the question. It's one of those unspoken things. So from indigenous communities like ours in Hawaii, and I'm sure similar with all other indigenous communities, we do what we understand is necessary and correct based on our cultural practices, and we engage in things like this, you know. And what we don't talk about is that there is also another element, and I've been trying to usher this into the discussion, is that we also believe that we are also guided by our kupuna. So my presentation today was for you all to call into our presence your own kupuna, your own ancestors, because there are some things that are unknown to us. There are some things that are not possible for us to accomplish by ourselves, and yet we discount the fact that our kupuna, our ancestors, are also assembled, and they might be the ones to have other conversations, and they're the ones that will help to perhaps open pathways and create opportunities, and even be as bold to say is that they might be the ones that are going to show us innovations. And they're going to be the ones that are going to show us new discoveries. And we cannot discount that it exists. But from an indigenous perspective, it's part of what we do. So it's not a question. But when I'm amongst a lot of scientists, as an example, I was at many conferences, but speaking to scientists about what's happening right now. So a scientist in a conversation says, we know from the science that the direction we're moving in right now is not the right direction. Is that we have all the information, we have all of the data, we have all of the quantitative information, and yet we have a difficult time making a shift. And so I said, would you be interested in taking a voyage with us? Let's jump on a canoe, and that horizon there that you have no information and understanding of, will you be willing to take a trip on a voyage of discovery to find perhaps new innovations, new ideas, new discoveries, and then we can share and learn that together that will be relevant for what we need to do today in meeting the changing times. And he looked at me and he says, oh, I'd like to do that, but I'm afraid, you know. And I said, well, maybe it's time for us to be as bold enough to take that voyage and know that we're not taking it alone, and that what you don't see is also present, and that's the spiritual element that comes into this. So I want to share that this is a really important part of indigenous thinking, indigenous mindset, is that we're not alone in this, you know. So, but sharing that is important, so others are open to our thought. And then just know that taking a trip over the horizon of which you have no knowledge or understanding of is a good way to open the way for possibilities. But you got to take that voyage.
Thank you. I think, you know, taking the voyage is something that's really interesting when we think of the perspective of so many people who are in this room, those who are listening virtually, and those who don't even know that they have the possibility to be present. And I think that's just, again, a reminder that a concept that was instilled in me when I was a kid was, you know, you get to be that vessel by with which work can move. And I think we all get to be those people. We get to take that journey. I recognize we've got just about 5 minutes left in this session. We have some incredible questions that have come in from the audience. And so it's important not to feel dejected, but also to feel grounded. Two really interesting things we get to hold as truths. So as we close, what words of inspiration or action can we weave into our work to help our communities to feel reprieve and also what is needed for science to continue to think in those much more innovative ways. So again, how do we get more people engaged? What would you like folks to take home with them? We'll go ahead and open that up to whomever would like to start.
Okay. I'll take that hint. So for us, and you've heard me talk about this before, we want to make sure that we're finding people, and I know we're all trying to find people everywhere to draw them in, to recruit them, to help us do this work. And throughout our work, music has been a determining and guiding factor. It started, easily enough with just kind of like having a little bit of inspiration to sit down and write a campaign, and it has continued to be a vessel in a link to other folks. When we started to do more of this musical work, which, by the way, I haven't played an instrument in 20 years, so it was not coming from there. It was just coming from connection and revitalization, and that rooting as well. When we heard about all these songs, that were 100 years old, 150 years old, that were about the ocean, and obviously they weren't written with the idea of, creating or supporting a policy goal or anything to that effect, which doesn't mean that we can't go there. But it's really interesting how that planting yourself and rooting and just feeling that enormity of community can sometimes help. And what made us go forward with people coming up to us and saying, I go to ocean events even when they're in Latin America, and they're always a certain way. And when we talk about bringing culture into it, we really are able to connect more and ground ourselves in that community.
And just to talk a little bit about what Uncle Saul was mentioning too, the spirit and the rooting of the work that we're doing. I want to leave this thought on World Ocean Day that the value of adding the indigenous story to all of our work is adding the spiritual side of why we do what we do and why we're protecting, and specifically our area of the Chumash sanctuary designation is our most sacred point, where we believe that all people and all souls leave Turtle Island. And so there's always an element of the sacred in why we advocate, and especially why Indigenous people want to protect certain sites. And so thinking about the spiritual aspect and our connection to the ocean, and for the Chumash people, we do believe that our ancestors, are the whales and the dolphins and the fish. And whether you take that literally or figuratively, we don't have the authority to jeopardize their lives. So that's not something that we were given, and we can't give permission to do that. So it's always something that is a tension within us, because we can't give the permission to destroy our relatives. And on World Ocean Day, we just want to make sure that we remember that the indigenous stories are stories of our ancestors coming from the ocean, and where we all began and where we'll all go back to. So that will be my thing that I think about today to celebrate, is our connection to our places. And if we take care of our places, then everything would be all right if we take care of our places that we're from.
Yeah.
Excellent. And
Yeah, and just real quickly, just adding to what Violet said, is that if we can take with us what I said, to an opportunity to go back and learn from our past, so that we can understand where we're at right now and find pathways looking forward. And then also to understand that we are all really connected, and that we're in one place. It's island Earth. There's only one Earth, and that all things on this one island Earth are interconnected based on just our own cultural genealogy. And if we can take that concept, no matter where we're at, and whether you're terrestrial or marine, there's no separation from that. The blue ocean makes half the oxygen you breathe, as well as the terrestrial. And so see ourselves as one rather than see ourselves as subdivisions by political lines that divide us from boundaries of protection versus ocean versus land, and then turn that into the place that we really are and bring it back to balance.
Thank you. And Lola, recognizing we're just about at time,
Sure.
I'll give you the final words.
I mean, I love this, and as someone who spends most of her time looking at the Earth on a really large scale, I can just second everything that has been said here. It's, you know, there are no separations. We're all one. There's that connection, and yeah, I think that's what I'll end on. Thank you.
Excellent. Now, for those in the audience who did take the time to go ahead and fill these out, we're very much into audience participation. So following this panel, I will go ahead and follow up with each of the panelists. If you did submit a question that has not been answered, I'll go ahead and ensure that warmly and accurately I reflect what you've shared. And then we'll seek to go ahead and coordinate with the foundation and see if we can't get a blog or something that goes ahead and answers those questions, because we recognize the concepts of ocean climate solutions and resiliency don't stop here. We'll keep that conversation going. And thank you again all for joining us today.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Phenomenal. I love each and every one of you so much. Sorry. There were so many pieces of that conversation that I hope we can continue and make sure that we bring into the work that we do every day, into the lives with our families, with our communities, because I think that is truly, Uncle Saul, as you were saying, like, to move forward, we must look backwards, and we must look outside of ourselves, and we must look holistically in every way that we can to really think about our ways of knowing, how we can broaden our sense of intelligence, and what that means for action. True action, because right now we are in dire need of elevating and accelerating action. And so because of the work that you guys do every single day, tirelessly, thank you. Thank you. And we will work with you, Betsy, on getting that blog. So I think that is an important piece. I appreciate that is the desire. We want to make sure we continue these conversations, that we can help. So please do make sure that you're engaging with us so that we can make sure we can help with those pieces. So up next on our agenda, for those who are able to join us, we will have more virtual breakout sessions from our partners and sponsors, including Ocean Conservancy, Compass, Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, NOAA Fisheries, as well as our own NOAA leadership. So please do make sure that you look at that and participate in those additional discussions while you're over lunch. You can access them on the virtual platform as well as the CHOW Ocean mobile app. We appreciate being able to have each and every one of you join us in these discussions and continuing to deepen the work that we do, deepen our understanding, and deepen the connections that we make. And so it's vitally important to make sure that we can have as many of the people participating in those as possible. So our next plenary session will be after lunch. We'll be back here at 1:15 for a conversation on maritime transportation and infrastructure. Thank you all.